What a fascinating creature the carrion beetle is. Always appearing where death casts its shadow to feast and reproduce. Then gone as if it were never there. I hadn't even seen one until that day. Now, I don't think I'll ever forget that twisted bright orange and black pattern. It started on maybe a Tuesday. I'm not really sure, honestly. I haven't kept track of time for so long now that I couldn't really tell you how much has passed. I'm sorry, I'm getting way too ahead of myself. From what I do remember, it was a beautiful day. The sun was out and shining so warmly on the grass outside our front window. My wife and I decided to take our daughter to her favorite spot, just down by the beach, not too far from where we live. We all got ready and jumped inside our car. It was packed by the time we had gotten there, and our daughter, Olivia, was beyond her ability to contain her excitement.
Dad, hurry up!
She shouted as she rushed out of the vehicle. Don't go too far, hon. There's a lot of people here. We don't want to lose sight of you. She looked back and nodded happily. We got down to the beach, and immediately Olivia jumped into the water. We set up our little spot not too far from the shore and started to unroll some towels and a beach umbrella. Truly seemed like the perfect day. It must have been maybe half an hour when Olivia ran back to me with a kind of concerned look on her face. What's wrong, honey? I asked.
Why is the moon out right now, Dad?
Well, the moon shows itself sometimes during the day. It happens all the time, sweetie. Nothing you have to worry about. Replying with a light-hearted smile, thinking her childish imagination must have gotten the better of her.
But, Dad, why is it so big and bright?
She asked with quite a concern in her tone that I decided to take a look up. And then I saw it. The moon, or I think it was the moon. It was huge. At least 7 times the size it usually would be. And as bright as the sun was, if not brighter. I sat there in awe of this thing. It was then I noticed that most people on the beach had also been staring up at it for quite some time. Everyone's gaze was completely focused. Not a sound could be heard. Then, suddenly, a woman shrieked. The sound easily echoed through the silent air, and everybody turned to see what the alarm was for.
What's happening?
The woman said shakily. Her skin, my God, it was like small festering boils just started to cover the entire surface of her body. She started foaming at the mouth, and then dropped to the ground, shaking like she was having a seizure. Everybody screamed in fear. We have to get out of here now, I said to Lindsay, with more concern in my voice than I think I've ever had in my life. She firmly agreed, and without hesitation, we stood up and nearly turned around before everyone else got the same idea and frantically started running to find their vehicles. It was complete chaos. They started pushing, pulling, and throwing others out of the way without remorse. Some were getting trampled beneath the feet of those trying to escape the nightmarish scene. There was so much screaming. I had to cover my daughter's ears to try and save her from bursting out into a fit of fear and screaming herself. We somehow managed to make it to our vehicle and get inside. Olivia sat in my wife's lap. There was no time to try and get her into the car seat. Not in this landscape. With a last glance over to the object in the sky, I could see what I could only imagine was the same vision as the darkest night terror could ever look. People in such psychotic fear. Then, everything fell silent. And not just the kind of quietness that comes from the absence of speech, but complete silence. My wife and I looked at each other in complete disarray. I couldn't hear anything, and judging by the look on her face, she couldn't either. Without any time to contemplate what was happening to us, a sharp tone pierced through my ears, and with that came the loss of consciousness. I don't know how much time passed while I was out, but when I awoke, my blood ran cold. I was no longer sitting in my car with my family. In fact, they were nowhere in sight. I had no idea where I was. I looked around to see if there was anything I could recognize. Anything at all. I was in some sort of building, sitting on a well-aged wooden floor. Old stone bricks held together by cement made the walls, but they were covered in vines, moss, and all kinds of different green vegetation. This place obviously hadn't been tended to for years. So how did I end up here? Where even was I? And was I even alive? I had so many questions I knew I wasn't going to get answers to. I looked around and noticed what looked like a window, or at least something I could look out of so I could possibly try and find something that told me where I was. Walking up to the window, I quickly remembered my family. My family, I said loudly to myself. Olivia! Lindsay! Are you guys there? No reply. No anything. Just the faint sounds of wind blowing heavily outside, whatever this building was. I continued towards the window. The way I felt taking that first glance could only be described as the way a baby bird feels when it falls too early from the nest. Completely helpless. What I saw was a dark abyss that stretched on for an eternity. Nothing above, nothing below. Yet light still was shining through at some untraceable point. This building I was in also carried on upwards for another 9 stories above, and 9 stories below the room of which I was standing in. The top peaked in a pyramid shape, much like a clock tower's top would. What is this place? I asked myself. An unfamiliar sound of rustling quickly hit my ears, and I turned around. The sound came from just around the corner at the opposite side of where the window was. I looked around to see a large pile of what looked like meaty flesh covered in black feathers on the ground. It was half covered by shadows and surrounded by blood. The stench of warm, rotting meat hit my nose. I nearly vomited. And against my own better judgment, I slowly made my way over to this dying creature. Maybe it was just some sort of human intuition to try and help something wounded. Or maybe insanity had completely taken over. But step by step, I walked closer to it. As I took my last step, it began to twitch. It shook and convulsed more violently every second I stood there. It began screaming, the most blood-curdling cry I've ever heard in my life. And as the sound of the cry grew to the point of which I thought my eardrums would burst, it shot out of the window and into the never-ending sky. I stood there with goosebumps covering my skin until the faint sound of footsteps approaching grabbed my attention. I eyed my surroundings for somewhere to hide, but the room didn't offer much. In fact, there wasn't any place to hide at all. The only option I really had was to hang out of the window opening. And so that's what I did. Knowing that at any moment I could slip and fall into the dismal black abyss below, I clung to dear life, just hoping whoever came into that room did not notice my hands. The door opened, my heart pumping like I've never felt it before. Adrenaline and fear filled my body as I awaited what was going to happen next.
Something's not right,
a man said to himself. I heard his footsteps walk around the room, as if he knew somebody uninvited had made an appearance.
Something's wrong here. The crow is gone.
I then heard the walking suddenly stop, as if he noticed something, and a feeling of dread ran through every vein like I've never felt before. As quickly as I could blink, I felt hands wrap around each of my wrists and pull me back into the room.
You're not supposed to be here,
he said, holding me above him, his body wrapped in a dark cloth material-made cloak. I couldn't even respond. I was completely frozen in place. His face didn't make sense. I couldn't describe it even if I tried. It was the shape of a human, but nothing human about it. I don't even know how it spoke. There was no mouth. He stood there, clenching my arms in his hands, and without eyes, he made the most intense eye contact anyone has ever made with me, in my entire life. Where am I? I was barely able to get the words out of my mouth.
You're far from where you should be.
He replied as he put me onto the ground.
You need to go. Now. He won't like knowing you're here.
Who is he? I asked with fear resonating through my voice.
Go through that door. Don't stop. Don't look back.
What even is this place? And who are you? I asked, trembling where I stood. He was silent after his last words, but pointed insistently at the same door he came through. I walked towards the door and could see a staircase laid in front of me, just outside the door frame. It went down, very far down. So far down, in fact, that the darkness eventually swallowed any and all light that was faintly coming through the doorway I was standing in front of. This was the only way out, though, so I headed forward. What felt like about 15 minutes or so of walking down steps, and I finally hit the bottom. I couldn't see anything. There wasn't a single shred of light, anywhere. This was beyond any darkness I've ever been in before. Totally encapsulated by the nothingness. The only way I was even able to tell I was going in any sort of right direction was the feeling of a wall on either side of my body. I kept my arms out in front of the walls as well, feeling around for a door, another hall to walk, or anything really. It wasn't very long after walking that something came into reach. It was a wall, maybe a door? I tried to feel around for something to tell me what this dead end might be. Voila! A wheel type of object right in the middle of what I assumed, or at least hoped, was a door. The wheel felt old and rustic. I was beginning to feel like this entire place hadn't had any visitors for quite a very long time. I gripped the wheel tightly with both hands, and using all my force, the wheel moved. Slowly, I turned it clockwise until I felt the door release from the wall. I opened it slowly, not knowing what awaited me on the other side. A bright light shined through, completely eating the darkness that once laid inside that hallway. I was in complete disbelief. This door somehow led me back into my car's driver's seat. It didn't make any sense, but nothing really did anymore. I got into my car seat, still not understanding at all how this door was able to open up to my car. Still parked at the beach, but I got inside. The second I closed the door behind me and turned my head to look back at it, it was gone. In its place reappeared the car door with the same beach scene I looked out at, before whatever just happened to me. The only thing that truly took me back about returning was that the shore was completely empty. No bodies, no massacre. Not even any remnants of blood in the sand. It almost looked like nobody had set foot here for years. The stillness of the scene was almost more unsettling than the bodies I'd seen before I left this place. I tried starting the car engine. No luck. It was then that I noticed that the cars still parked in this parking lot, including my own, had a light film of dust, like they'd just been sitting here for much longer than I thought I'd been gone. I grabbed the handle on the door of my car, pulled it, and stepped out of my vehicle. It was so quiet, so peaceful. Where did everybody go? The psychological toll I'd taken from experiencing everything I had up to this point had started to weigh on me, but there was no way I could give up now. Unsure of what to do, I started walking in the direction that led back to my home. There had to be somebody in one of the neighboring houses, at least I hoped. It was roughly a 20-minute walk back. There was no sign of any movement besides some of the cawing of some crows flying above. I walked up to a few houses on the way and knocked on the front doors. None of them answered. I peeked into the windows of the houses to hopefully find something that was alive, but nothing was ever there. Most of the houses looked completely abandoned. I finally got to the front steps of my house and rushed up the 5 steps that led to a small deck and front doors. Reaching my hand out to grab the doorknob, I twisted it and somehow it opened, just left completely unlocked. I walked inside and yelled out, "Lindsay, are you there? Olivia, please answer me, somebody!" I walked around the house aimlessly looking for my wife or daughter, wishing they'd just come out and this nightmare would all be over. Then I got to the master bedroom doors. I opened them and instantly fell to my knees. Tears filled my eyes and my stomach vomited whatever it had inside it from earlier that day. What I saw was the rotten corpses of my wife and daughter laid on the bed, covered in those beetles. After a complete mental breakdown, I got up off my knees and walked over to the bodies. There was a note on the bedside table beside them. This is what it read.
David, if you ever find this note, just know that we never stopped loving you and hope that it would never have to come to this. That day, you just disappeared. We didn't know what to do. There was so much chaos and terror that we came back home and did our best to live whatever lives we could after that thing came. It took so much from us. Millions, billions of people vanished that day. It was like the rapture was happening. The animals too, and the lakes were completely void of any life, except those crows. Anything mechanical or electronic stopped working shortly after. There was no way to get out to the city. It would have taken weeks if we tried, and even then, most would have died from starvation along the way. Besides, so many people vanished, and everybody went so crazy that the idea of working together wasn't exactly on the minds of most. Though we were able to make a small system. It's just us now. I miss you so much. It'll be 7 years next week. I hope we meet again. I love you. We love you. Goodbye.